Tonight's gospel reading is a very ominous gospel for the third Sunday of Lent. This gospel reading gives us a description of what happens if a country turns its back on God, if a person turns their back on Christ and the cross. You know, I've always admired Reverend Billy Graham. He was a preacher for well over 50 years, died just a couple years ago. But he always would preach inside of stadiums, packed stadiums around the world. It was amazing that whatever stadium he was preaching in, if the stadium held 50, 60, 70,000 people, there wasn't a seat left in the entire stadium. But I read an interesting little story in his autobiography. And he writes about the very first time he preached inside of a stadium down in Texas. The stadium was packed. At the end of his preaching the first night, which was Monday, he had the altar call, and 7,000 people came forward to turn their life over to Christ. The second night, he had the altar call after his preaching, and 12,000 people came forward to turn their life over to Christ. On the third night, after his preaching, he had the altar call, and only 5 people walked forward. He was aghast. He was stunned. He stopped the music, and he walked over to the pulpit, and he looked at the people, and he said, "Something's wrong tonight. I must have said something wrong. What went wrong? I had so many people come up, thousands the first 2 nights, and now only 5 come forward." One man sitting right there on the front row, first seat in the front row, raised his hand. And Reverend Graham recognized the fellow and called the fellow up to the pulpit. When the man got to the pulpit, Reverend Graham said to him, "Well, tell us what I said wrong." The man said this, "Reverend Graham, you said nothing wrong. It's what you didn't say is the reason why people did not come up tonight to turn their life over to Christ. For tonight, you never mentioned the cross. It is the cross that makes a difference in a person's life. It's the cross that makes a person who has an addiction find liberation from that addiction. It's the cross that allows a person who is lost find a path of hope. It is a cross that allows a person, if they're struggling, to find smoothness in their life." You never mentioned the cross tonight. Reverend Graham vowed from that day forward he would always mention the cross. He would always focus on the cross, because the cross, if you focus on it now, that's what gives us purpose and sense and direction and hope. That's what allows us to stand on terra firma when your life is crumbling and falling apart. It turns out to be the essence of tonight's gospel reading, coming out of the 2nd chapter of John, verses 2 to 25. Now, the 2 powerful verses out of all those verses in tonight's gospel reading, which there are 14, of verse 13 to 14. We want to take a look at those 2 verses. Again, the 2nd chapter of John. We want to start right at the very top. It said Jesus went up to Jerusalem and found in the temple. I'm going to stop right there and we'll continue on in a moment. But Jesus found in the temple. You see, the Jews in Judaism back in those days had only one temple, one church. And there was this temple right here. Now, this temple had been under construction for over 46 years. They were still working on that temple. So you would have thought that their only church, their only temple, under construction day and night for all those years, they would have respected and loved their temple. They would never have defiled this special temple because they only had one. And what does Jesus find? He finds the opposite. They defile what they only had one of. Let's continue where I left off. So Jesus found in the temple area those who sold oxen, sheep, and doves, as well as money changers seated there. He made a whip of cords and drove them all out of the temple area with the sheep and the oxen, and spilled the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who sold doves, he said, "Take these out of here and stop making my Father's house a marketplace." You see, Jesus had become upset because they lost the focus of the reason of the temple. And what happened when they did that? Their life fell into chaos. They were confused. They took the temple that gave them sense and direction and hope and vitality, and they destroyed its reverence, and now they're wandering on in chaos. They have no idea what's right or wrong. You see, that's what makes this gospel reading so ominous. What this gospel reading, especially these verses through 13 to 16, the second chapter of John tells us what? It tells us when you take God out of your country can fall into chaos. Everyone running in different directions. No one truly understanding what is right and what is wrong. The moral value and moral code begins to collapse, almost in proportionality to the amount of chaos that creeps into the country as you begin to mask over God. And the same thing happens in life, for our life. You see, the temple was to be a place where a person could find solace rather than solicitation. That's what they turned it into. This temple was to be a place a person could find comfort rather than commodities as they turned it into. This temple was to be a place where a person could find promise rather than produce, and that's what it became. You see, the temple was to make a difference in a person's life, but they turned it into a marketplace. When you lose the essence of what it is you say you are, your life falls into chaos. Reverend Graham, in his autobiography, discovered that on the very third night of his preaching, when he inadvertently never focused on the cross. And after that night, he focused on a cross for over 50 successful years, packing stadiums in country after country. And when he would call people forward, he let them know that when you come forward and turn your life over to Christ or rededicate yourself to Christ, what you're focusing on is the cross. Take a look at that cross. That cross is my story. That cross is your story. You see, the crucifixion story is something that we've all experienced in life. And the older you are, the more crucifixions you experience and taste and touch in your life. The more trial and tribulation you encounter. We all live the crucifixion on a regular basis, and the more we try to be Christ-like, the more we focus on Christ, the more we dedicate ourselves to Christ and to God, the more the devil is going to try to interrupt that flow. And we're going to say to ourselves, I can't lose the cross. Because if I take the cross out of my life, I invite chaos into my life. Then I have a life full of drama, full of wondering what's going on. I become lost. Our prayer tonight should be this, and your prayer tomorrow morning should be this: Heavenly Father, give us the gift to rededicate our country to God so that we don't fall into chaos if we haven't already. Give us as individuals the ability to always to focus on that cross, because in the cross I find my essence, I find my way, I find my support, I find my worth, I find my value, I see my direction. Because God, if I shut the cross out of my life, if I say no to the cross, if I take down every crucifix in my home or in my church or any other location, if I remove the Ten Commandments, I remove any thought of God, what happens to my country, or what happens in my community, what happens in my church, and more importantly, what happens to me? The answer is pretty simple, as Jesus shows us right here. Then your life falls into chaos.